This is going to be the second video in what is going to be a three-part series where we walk you through doing a flame assessment, a flammable gas coverage assessment, and a toxic gas coverage assessment on a process area. Last time we did the flame assessment where we started out and made a baseline layout after grading everything, and then we did a proposed layout to improve our coverage, and now this is going to be the flammable gas assessment video. We're going to start out by assigning our grades. We're going to use our draw tool to create the grades. The default target project folder for the draw tool is going to be the flammable gas grade PE folder. When we're doing grades in HazMap3D, gas refers to flammable gas and T-gas refers to toxic gas. This is a carryover from when we only had flammable gas and we did not have toxic gas until we added it later. So since this area is mostly open, I'm going to choose open. I'm going to leave my height or offset to 5 meters because that's usually a pretty good height for doing gas assessments. And I'm either going to do extrude shape or box usually when I'm doing flammable gas. So for extrude shape, I'm going to click on the corners and I can define a irregular shape if I want to. With box, I am restricted to only doing a rectangle. So to show you box, I'm going to zoom in, click, use my scroll wheel to zoom out. Make sure I get inside the bund. And I'm going to double click at the opposite corner of the box that I want to define. And there is my grade open shape. So having defined my open area, I do notice that there is a more congested part of the model right here. And just to be conservative, I might want to assign a partially enclosed or congested grade to this area because I think I might get more flame acceleration if I get a spark in this area, and there's plenty of equipment like rotating equipment like these pumps that might give me problems in this area. So I'm going to hide my open grade area and I'm going to turn on my sectioning tool, which in this case is just going to be very convenient for me, and the default position is going to slice through pretty much exactly where I want. And then I'm going to turn on my gas grade PE, set my offset to 5 or keep it there, and this time I'm going to use extrude shape instead of box. And then I'm just going to click through. You just want to click once at each vertex that you want. And you don't need to be super precise, you just want to roughly draw this in. And then when we get to the last one, I want to double click just to warn you about one thing real quick though. I do not want my lines to cross. Like having this would be very bad. If I try and double click that, I'm going to get an error. It's not going to work. It's not going to render properly. But I just want to make sure that none of my lines cross, and then double click at my last point. And there is my partially enclosed area. And we can see that because I'm clicking through, I'm not perfectly lined up with the edges of that tarmac, but it doesn't really make any kind of practical difference. So I can turn back on my open area, and I can see I've got that partially enclosed area inside the larger open area, and because of the grade prioritization that we talk about in another video, this area is going to be treated as partially enclosed even though it is within both an open and a partially enclosed area, because the partially enclosed is going to take priority. So having done that, let's turn off my sectioning tool, and we're going to start doing our grade exclusions or our volume exclusion for the internal volumes of vessels. To kick things off, I'm just going to turn off the gas gray display so I can see a little bit more clearly. And then, just like what we did with the flame assessment, we're going to exclude the internal volumes of the large objects one at a time from the gas assessment. Just like with flame, we want to do this one object at a time and not try to exclude multiple objects at a time, just because this is going to lead to excluding the space in between, which is something we don't want. Some might question why we have people exclude from flame and exclude from gas separately, but this ultimately just gives us a little bit more control and lets us set up our different assessments the way we want to. So this looks like all the big stuff. So my grades are set up, and now I'm going to start programming in the assessment. Just as a quick check here to remind myself, I'm getting about 1.3, 1.35 in that neighborhood for my deck level in the bund. So I'm going to say new Flammable Gas Assessment folder. Scroll down here, hide that just to make things easy on myself. I'm going to call this bund area baseline gas, or let's say flam gas. I'm going to draw graphically just to make getting my assessment shoebox where I want it to be relatively easy, with a 5-meter offset like I did for my grading. Doing a little bit of zooming out and zooming back in with my scroll wheel to try and get the view or the part of the bund area that I want in my screen. So right there, about, that gets the entire bund area, so I'm just going to double click there. And I'm going to force this to 1.3 and 5. And I'm going to set my deck Z to 1.3 for referencing all of my ALD heights, and I'm going to set to 11 slices and a representative Z of 3, and show assessment volume real quick here. And if I turn back on the display on my flammable gas grades, that looks pretty good to me. So with that said, I'm just going to turn those gas grades back off on the display for now, just to keep my display tidy. Turn off the assessment shoebox now that I'm done, happy with that. Select none just to clear my selections. And let's start putting in some gas detectors. I'm going to start out by putting in some perimeter OPGDs, which is usually my first step in a space like this when I want to design a flammable gas detection layout. And since I don't have any posts where I want a lot of these detectors to go already in the model, I'm just going to double click on the ground and have the computer create what I want. And then having created that where I want it, I'm just going to raise the detector up to, since my DEC Z is about 1.3, I'm going to boost this up to 3.8. And I'm going to hit save. And the one thing I want to check right here is it's saying that I'm impinged. So I'm just going to reduce the diameter on that display. And I see that it looks like my big problem right here is this post here in the middle of the bund area. So looking at this, I think my best bet is to increase to 14 or 114 on my X coordinate. If I say OK, so I'm getting none found on my impingement warning. So that's one open path in. Coming over here, I can see I'm going to run into some possibly similar challenges with this thing and with this post right here. And oops, I accidentally said give me point detectors, so I'm going to undo that real quick. And then just double click and double click. And I'm going to once again raise to 3.8 and 3.8. And we notice that because I changed my display diameter on the last one and saved it, it's remembering that display diameter now. And I'm going to hit OK. Or actually, first I'm going to change this to GD2. Hit OK. And I can see it looks like I'm below that piping there, and the only thing that's giving me trouble right here is this thing, but it's still telling me that I'm impinged because of this. So since I don't really think that's going to be a problem, obviously they're not going to put this thing right behind this one when they're installing this. I'm just going to go ahead and say ignore. So it's not going to fuss at me about that later when I run my assessment. So next up, I'm going to double click right here, double click about here, and this will be OPGD3. I'm going to, once again, even though this is going to be partially over this area here, which is going to be a slightly lower elevation, I'm just going to keep this thing at an elevation of 3.8 for the Z coordinate. And so I might want to be aware of the fact that deck elevation is going to be a little bit lower here. And I'm just going to Straighten this out to 5 and 5. I hit OK. Check this out. It's saying I'm impinged still. And it looks like what's getting me is that pipe right there. So I think the best way to resolve that, based on the elevation, this pipe is at 3.79. So the best way to deal with this, I think, is just going to be to bump up the open path to an elevation of 4. And that takes care of my impingement. And it's probably worth noting as I try to make sure that these impingement warnings are clear or okay. You can see from what I did from OPGD2 that there's nothing stopping me from just changing changing this to ignore and not fixing the block. But the point of the block in the warning is to tell you when you might have a problem. And so it just makes sense to try and clear it and make sure that you're not going to be giving too many issues to your construction people when the time comes to actually build this layout. And I'm adjusting this position a little bit, extending this out to where these are a little bit more modeled like they're going to be hanging on one post, because ideally I'd like to just use the same post for both of these perimeter detectors. So now I'm coming over here. This is going to be my last perimeter OPGD. I can see already that I'm going to have this thing right here possibly giving me some trouble. So I'm just going to click a little bit outside of the bund proper. Like I'm going to put my post a little bit outside of the bund. I'm going to make this OPGD 4. Going to increase the elevation to 3.8 like I've been doing for most of these. And going to make this Y value sync up to 340.5 just to kind of line it up along the bund. And I'm still getting an impingement warning even though I put it outside the bund. So let's look at this a little bit. And what I'm finding is I have those pipes up here. I have this one blocking, but I don't want to move up because I have this one over here. So since I don't want these to be interfering with each other and because I don't want the pipes to be interfering, since I started out at 2.5, I'm just going to try and reduce this to about 2.3 meters above the deck, which should still be acceptable. I'm still getting an impingement warning, so what does it say? Okay, it's still saying the post is getting me. So I moved over, but I guess I didn't move over far enough. Yeah. So at that point, we're going to just change this to 2.5 and 2.5. And now I'm showing none found, so I'm happy. So those are my 4 perimeter detectors. And now, because I've got those, but I also want to be able to kind of chop this in half and provide some more open path detection in the middle of the area, because I can see this nice and straight and open. Oops. So I will just double click here and double click over here. And having gotten that in the ballpark, I'm going to change this to 340.5, similar to what I had over here as far as the Y position of that other open path detector. I'm going to change my elevations to 3.8 because I don't want to actually have my open path on the ground. And I'm just going to put both of these at 100, just so I have round numbers and so that those are aligned the way I want them to be. And having fixed that, I see none found, because that pipe rack going over this area is well above the level where I want my detector. And the main challenge you're going to want to avoid here is that when you install these, you don't want the detectors mount in such a way to where these posts are going to block that beam path. And if I want to be a little bit conservative about how I handle that, I can always change this Y coordinate to 1 and inset that a little bit, and take this in a little bit to say 6.5. That's more like it. Remember that HazMap3D will never correct you if your typing is bad. So those are my 5 open path detectors. And just to see what the kind of result that gives me, I'm just going to run an assessment real quick. And I see for this open area, that's giving me really good coverage everywhere except in this more congested area that I assigned a higher grade to. So if I want to try and make this situation a little bit better, I'm going to hide my results real quick. I'm going to grab a point detector. And I think I can probably get away with putting a point detector about here. And my dec Z right here is about 1.55. So I'm going to make this 3.05 to put this detector about 1.5 meters above the local deck. And I'm going to call this PGD1. And HazMap is going to let me just continue to run new assessments and see how each new detector I'm adding is going to impact my results. So that's going to make it really easy for me to just continue adding detectors as I see fit until I see that I'm getting the kind of results that I want. And as I'm doing this, it's worth noting I can peel back the top couple of layers here and see that towards the top of my assessment area, because I'm assessing to 5 meters above the deck, I might see a little bit more yellow, but as I peel that back a little bit, I'm seeing pretty good connected coverage. And like these lingering areas of only 1 out of N coverage are small, and they're mostly cut up by these excluded volumes. So those are not terribly concerning residual gaps to me. So I might want to do at this point is get maybe 1 more detector in here. See if I can find a promising spot where there's already a post. And so I can probably just pop one last detector in here. And if this were a real-world facility, you might be a little bit concerned about actually visiting this spot and making sure that you're actually going to get good airflow through this area, and that it's not going to be just a dead spot. But on the assumption that I will get good airflow through this central area, because I can see I've got a whole bunch of potential cross currents in areas that air can come through here depending on how the wind's blowing. Let's put that point gas detector in there and run the assessment one more time. And if I peel back the top 2 or 3 layers, 2 or 3 or 4, I see I'm getting pretty good 2 out of N coverage through there, and I'm just getting relatively narrow and short bits of 1 out of N coverage in the middle here. This remaining stuff is not really worth, in my opinion, adding more detectors over. So at that point, I'm mostly covering this area with the open path gas detectors, and then I've just sprinkled in a couple of point gas detectors to try and boost my coverage and boost my likelihood of detection in this more congested area, and that's giving me a pretty good layout. I'm happy with that coverage. The PE coverage might seem a little bit low for 2 out of N, but again, it's just a whole lot of narrow gap spaces between areas of good coverage. So even though that number might not look great, I'm pretty happy with it, especially considering I've got at least 1 out of N low voted coverage everywhere. And so with that done, I can say print report, tell it what I want, and output to a PDF, and then I'm going to be done. Just as some cleaning up stuff I can do. If I want to change my display options, I can change my display options back to 2.5. Or if I want to, since these open paths are largely covering an open graded area where the target gas cloud is 10 or a 5 meter radius, I can change that up for visualization purposes. And if you look at this, it becomes a little bit more clear why I'm getting some of the better coverage I'm seeing. And I can keep those at a 5 meter diameter radius displayed, and then just put the point gas detectors at a 2.5, because the point gas detectors are covering a more of a partially enclosed or congested area, so the 2.5 is more representative for them. If I want to, because I've added point detectors afterwards, I can bump this down using Alt and then the arrow down key to put my gas results at the bottom beneath everything else. With the flammable gas detection, I started this out by doing a with the flame detection, I started this out doing a baseline layout, and then I added, after I did that and saw that I wasn't happy with those coverage results, I cloned the folder and made a proposed layout. And so I had existing detectors and new detectors. With these, because I approached this flammable gas layout like I would if I had no existing flammable gas in the area and I was building a new layout from scratch, I could change this to proposed if I wanted to, and treat this like this was a brown or a blank piece of paper type of layout. And as part of that, I might go in and change all of these from existing to new. And then I would just want to rerun that assessment so that when I print the report, all of those would be classed as new in the report. And I can also turn off this checkbox here and then turn back on the gas results, and then I can see just the results without the display bubbles and display cone or cylinders for the open path detectors and the point detectors. So this has been the second video in our series showing you how to do different types of assessments in HazMap3D. We've done flame and now we've done flammable gas, and the third part, or the third type of assessment that we have to do, is going to be the toxic gas, and that will be in our third video.